Well, welcome everyone to the May meeting of the Intercontinental think tank. And
Thank you.
So I'd like to welcome you all here today. Let's move my camera over a little bit. And before we begin, just please remember to keep your microphones on mute and raise the hand icon if you have any questions. And you may also ask questions in the chat line. We'll be recording today's meeting, but conversations in the breakout rooms are not captured. So we have today, let's make it through, that's better. You can see we've got quite a program today, so we'll just get moving. If you want to say hello in the chat, say where you're joining from, and we're delighted to welcome members of district and international advocacy committees. Tomorrow, you may not be aware, is International Day for Biological Diversity. And with the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Diversity Framework at COP15 last year, there is something to celebrate. And if you're not sure what the framework is all about, I found this lovely little cheat sheet that identifies the areas of conserving, avoiding, safeguarding and acting to protect global biodiversity. I'll keep the link, will be available for that in the notes of today's meeting. As usual, today's meeting will be co-hosted by members of the Zonta Says Now working group. But first, we'll just take a minute to remind ourselves of why Zonta Says Now to gender equal climate action. This train was built during the Industrial Revolution at a time when humans started to put more greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. These are accumulating, forming a blanket around the planet and causing global warming and associated extreme weather events. Extreme droughts, fires, floods and storms trigger social disruption, causing millions of people to lose their livelihoods and homes. And this social disruption magnifies any existing inequality, including gender inequality. So Zonta Says Now stops the train by taking climate action and closing the gender gaps. And we use 3 tools to achieve this: our website, our think tanks, and our framework for action. And we're guided by the Zonta International statement on climate change and have links to many resources to help you on your climate journey. I'm going to hand over to Karen now from Germany to bring us up to date on the actions from the last meeting. Over to you, Karen.
Yes, thank you so much, Karen. Hello and welcome everybody again. Yeah, we had 2 main actions from the last meeting. The first, of course, was to continue to liaise with Zonta International regarding our survey. And this survey is to get a baseline of members' understanding of gender equal climate justice and their awareness of climate change and its interrelation with gender justice. And what actions the clubs are taking now, that's what we are also asking, because we want to identify knowledge gaps and find out what clubs have done so far and what we can learn from each other and see how comfortable members are with advocating on this issue. The results will then help us to develop resources to fill any gaps and to support the members on their Zonta Says Now journey. It's a huge transformation, I think, of Zonta, and so the results will help us a little bit. We drafted those surveys into 3 smaller surveys, one for individual members, one for club presidents, and one for district governors. And this already has been forwarded now to Zonta International for a review. And then I think we can roll that out, hopefully in June. And the second topic, of course, was our framework for action. As you might already know, we are focusing on disaster preparedness with this. And so we collected a lot of ideas and comments and included them in those in those frameworks for action. And yes, and so I think every club should be very well supported by this framework to think what individually and on local level can be done with a huge impact as well on global level, hopefully. And in addition, yes, be aware of our new Zonta Says Now logo, which is now available on the zonta.org website as well, and can be found there in the PR tools with, with the other Zonta logos. So, well, Dilruba, hello and welcome. I hand it over to you now for introducing our first wonderful speaker today. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for giving me this opportunity. Well, we have amongst us today Shahnaz Nathani, and it's my pleasure to introduce Shahnaz Nathani from Zonta Club of Colombo 2, District 25, Sri Lanka. Shahnaz joined her club as a charter member in December 1994. This gave her the opportunity to team up with a diverse group of professional women to carry out projects that would change the lives of women in her community. Her engagement with Zonta, Her engagement with Zonta and exposure globally made her appreciate the serious need for continuous action to help empower women. Shahnaz has held many positions in Zonta. At the club level, she was president in the biennium 2002-2004 and has held a variety of board and committee positions. At the district board level, she has been area director, treasurer, lieutenant governor, and governor in the biennium 2018-20. She has also served in many district roles, including being the nominating committee chairman and bylaws committee chair. She is currently a member of the Zonta International Advocacy Committee. Shahnaz spent 40 years in the aviation industry and retired in 2016. She now practices as an executive coach, helping people become exceptional leaders. Wow, that's wonderful. She enjoys the opportunity that Zonta has given her to connect with so many women of diverse backgrounds and cultures worldwide, and the great friendships she has made over the years. Her goal is to make Zonta organization by choice for men and women whose passion is gender equality and empowerment of women. If you think I should say some more about Shahnaz, let me end by saying Shahnaz, a good friend of ours in District 25, Bangladesh, which comprises of Bangladesh, Nepal, India. With these few words, I present before you our speaker for this evening, Shahnaz Nathani. Thank you.
If anyone has any questions for Shahnaz, put them in the chat line while you think of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dilruba.
Share the screen, Shahnaz.
Thank you. Thank you. Request Shahnaz to make a presentation, yes.
So when Dilruba, you said that one of the most, what I really love about Zonta is making friends, and it's making friends like you. Our friendship goes back over 25 years.
Yes.
Good evening, Zontians. I would like to start by sharing a little bit of information about Sri Lanka. We are an island nation of the southeastern shores of India with a population of a little over 22 million. Our ratio of females to males is around 52 to 48%. That's 52% females and 42% males. But sadly, this is not reflected in the number of women in parliament, which stands at only 5.3%. That is only 12 women out of a total of 225 parliamentarians. Women represent over 52% of the country's population, yet men continue to play a dominant role in the national legislature. We're a country with a diverse and beautiful natural environment that attracts tourists from every corner of the world, but that environment is under threat. How vulnerable are we to climate change? So what we see here is similar to what happens in other countries. But what happens due to natural causes? Being a tropical island, Sri Lanka is highly vulnerable to the adverse impacts of climate change. Flash floods and landslides due to intensive rainfalls, long droughts, less rain due to unusual monsoon pattern changes, sea level rise due to melting glaciers and ice caps. The livelihoods of many Sri Lankans are connected to sectors that are highly vulnerable to environmental factors. This increasing frequency of extreme weather events are ranking Sri Lanka amongst the top 10 countries on the Global Climate Risk Index 2018 to 20, despite contributing to less than just 0.1% of global warming. And the most impacted sectors are agriculture, which includes fishing, and the tourism sector. So for my presentation today, I've selected to focus on the effects of irregular weather patterns on agriculture and the impact to the women in that sector. Over 30% of Sri Lankans are employed in the agricultural sector, and 40% of these are women. The first and foremost impact of climate change on agriculture is reduced yield. In Sri Lanka, a significant majority of farming families are from rural areas with low economic diversification, where losses and damages affecting their cultivation can disturb their main source of livelihood and employment and threaten to push them into poverty. The financial impact to farmers. In some instances, if they take out loans to buy seeds, fertilizers, and other stuff, they are in danger of falling into poverty trap if the harvest fails. On the other hand, if they do not invest in their cultivation, they have no income. So what do? It's an absolute catch-22 situation. And then there's a financial impact to the country. On an average, we spend over 50 billion rupees in annual disaster losses related to housing, infrastructure, agriculture, and relief. Women in agriculture often seem disproportionately affected by climate and weather-induced disasters and experience climate change differently to men. While the contribution of these women to meet food security outcomes is immense, in most cases, their labor is not accounted for. Women are part of the agricultural labor force as both paid laborers and unpaid family workers. It is also estimated that more women work as unpaid family workers than men. Women occupy lower levels in the production value chains and are paid 30% lower wages than men who carry out similar work. The World Bank has, at a recent project, they've carried out an assessment of preparing for climate resilience, and they have identified the following: differences in access to disaster-related information and early warnings between men and women, lower preparation of women in leadership roles in community disaster preparedness activities, higher risk of gender-based violence faced by women and girls after a natural disaster takes place. So what happens when they are unable to adapt and recover from climate-induced loss and damage? These women from rural and agricultural backgrounds are forced to migrate for work. Some of them will come to the cities to work in factories, in shops, as housemaids in homes. Many of them will migrate as low-skilled laborers and domestic workers to countries in the Middle East, leaving their families behind. These women are vulnerable to adverse working and living conditions in their destination countries, often the subject of physical and sexual abuse by their employer. These are some of the actual pictures of what happens in the Middle East. And what about the children they leave behind, who are taken care of by their father or grandparents or a carer? These children suffer high depression rates, may not continue schooling, may suffer abuse at the hands of the carer, and the very fabric of these families is being disintegrated, and many families are splitting up as a result of disruptions to their normal life. So this slide is my story of the societal impact of climate change on the women in the rural agricultural sector of Sri Lanka. It is important for the policymakers to identify gender-sensitive strategies for responding to the crises caused by climate change. Failing this, more and more women will be driven to take jobs as domestic workers in the Middle East in a desperate attempt to escape extreme poverty and provide for their families, but at what cost? So going back to climate change, what have Sri Lankan policymakers done to prepare us? Like many other countries, the government is a signatory to the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and these are some of the key highlights from our NDC. Increase forest cover, achieve renewable energy, and achieve carbon neutral. What's interesting is, in reading through this NDC, I was happy to see that there's a whole chapter dedicated to the integration, into integrating gender into the NDC. And these are some of the actions that have been planned. I'm not going to go into too much details because, as I'm going to say, nothing much really has been done about this. However, there's no public information available on what actions have been taken by the government authorities so far, not only in respect of gender-specific action, but also on the impact of climate change as a whole. There have been some very limited public-private sector partnership programs where women are being trained on climate change adaptation and disaster risk resilience. In recent years, the country's three-decade-long civil war, the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the country's current huge economic crisis have dominated the government's attention. According to the World Food Programme, as at now, 6.3 million people, or over 30% of our population, are food insecure and require humanitarian assistance. Unfortunately, climate change, despite being a crucial issue for Sri Lanka, may be deprioritized in order to deal with the country's current economic crisis. But how can we prepare women for disaster? Climate change is a very serious threat. It affects all regions of the world, and its consequences impact many different aspects of our lives. Disaster preparedness plays an important role in building the resilience of communities. But unfortunately, women's involvement in this is very limited. So here are some reasons why women should be included in disaster preparedness. I think, as we all know, disasters affect women and girls in different ways than they affect boys and men. Research has found that in many cyclones, more women were affected than men. Why were so many women affected? Most women are home-based, responsible for children and elders, and culturally and socially isolated. They died in cyclones because they did not hear warnings, or because they had to fend for themselves. They had to fend for others as well as themselves. Due to strong cultural practices, many do not evacuate without their husband or another male to accompany them. So why do we need to include women? Women can help identify risks for themselves and for girls that may not be understood by male planners. Women's roles in the household and community may make them more likely to know who is vulnerable and who needs help. Women's representation can help ensure issues are seen from multiple angles, and including women in recovery helps reduce stereotypes and discrimination about women's roles. So what can Zonta do to include women in disaster preparedness? And this is top of my list. We can also have women participating in training that is relevant and targeted, which will increase their skills and confidence. This also provides them a platform for sharing their knowledge and field experiences. Initially identify disaster-prone areas and organize workshops to educate women and girls in the community on disaster preparedness and response. Train them in early warning systems, how to send messages through mobile phones and search and rescue. Support women in basic life-saving skills, building on coping strategies that would facilitate women and girls in disaster settings. For example, swimming lessons in flood-prone areas and preparation of go bags in the earthquake-prone areas. Invite local emergency responders or disaster experts to speak about their experiences and provide tips on how to prepare for emergencies. Identify potential leaders in these communities and help build their leadership and decision-making skills. As Zontians, we can advocate policymakers to include quotas for women in participation in local disaster risk management committees. In the area of raising awareness, launch social media campaigns to raise awareness about the importance of including women in disaster preparedness and response plans. Use hashtags and share stories of women who have been affected by disasters to highlight the need for gender-equal climate action. Conduct assessments to identify specific risks that women and girls may face during disasters. These may include risks related to health, safety, and security. And finally, post-disaster. Increase women's involvement in running of camps. Traditionally, these are male-dominated spaces. This helps reduce violence and will give women more control over their space. Why not even train women to construct camps? Time is of the essence, and the more hands in the construction means the camps will come up faster. Disasters are gender neutral, but their impacts are not. Engaging and empowering women is the key to strengthening disaster resilience of communities. And as she says, without women's voices, women-related issues would not be identified. Without women's participation, their priorities before, during, and after will not be addressed. These are some of my thoughts on the actions that Zonta can take to help women prepare for climate disaster. I've also included ideas given to me by some young Zontians whose opinions I greatly value. Unfortunately, none of the clubs in Sri Lanka have been involved in any project or activity in relation to the impact of climate change. But I hope that in the not-too-distant future that this will change. Thank you very much, Carol and the committee, for giving me this opportunity to speak this evening. I must say that the time I have spent in researching the impact of climate change has opened my eyes and ears to the importance of acting now. Thank you.
Thank you, Shahnaz, for that very insightful presentation. I really have a very good idea of Sri Lanka because when I was the governor, we had the tsunami, and I saw how the women came forward. They were resilient. So thank you for enlightening us with your presentation. I really don't have much questions, but if anyone does have, then put it on the chat box. But I would only want to ask one thing, that is, we all know that Sri Lanka is going through a very bad economic crisis. Now, how will your governmental organizations help with the climate change problems that you're facing? How are they going to integrate their policies and take climate change as one of the main issues to work with?
But
Do you think that you have, yes, you said that, but do you think that they have policies to do something?
They have policies. They have a very nice NDC, which I went through, but everything is on the back burner at the moment, because as of now, the priority is to see how can they help this 30% of the people give their food security. So
food security, yes.
It's going to take some time. But the one thing I'd like to say when I did this research was that Bangladesh was one country that after the cyclone have included women in their disaster preparedness committees.
Yes.
Which in the next cyclone, they saw that less women really were affected than in the previous years. So I think Bangladesh has done a lot for that.
Yes, working, yes. We did wonderful management, disaster management this time. You know that we were under the cyclonic zone last week, and there were terrible cyclones that were supposed to hit, but they deviated, thank God. But a lot of measures were taken to, to help the women and all their families to be, who were dislocated, to be housed and taken care of. Thank you so much, Shahnaz. Now I would hand over to Priya. Sorry, to Julie.
Thank you. Yeah. But I also have a question, a short question, because we have a short of time. But
yes.
I have a question. How does the communication of the early warning system work in Sri Lanka? Since women doesn't reach women as much as the men. How does the system work technically? Oh, you have, yes.
So really what, when I made that statement about the early warning system and reaching men, women later, I took it not only in the context of Sri Lanka, but as a whole. We don't have any technical early warning system. Yes, we have the organizations that inform the areas to expect. It's improved after the tsunami, but before the tsunami there was no early warning system at all. But there is.
But it must have been.
Is it through the phones or is it through loudspeakers?
No. It's just through loudspeakers and through messages. Yeah, messages on the phone, because a lot of on SMSs. I mean, like today we got a message saying that the weather is going to be very bad, and to ensure that people who go out, the fishermen who go out, not to go out today because there's expecting very heavy rains. But when I talked about more women being, the second part of my presentation was as a whole and not particularly Sri Lanka.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, Shana. And I will hand over to Julie Trone from the United States of America to introduce the next speaker.
Thank you, Pia. Thank you, Shahnaz. That was amazing what you spoke about. We all really enjoyed what you had to say. Next, as Carol gets the next slide up, Carol, we have your, like half of your slide, and the other half is your there we go. Okay, but that says Shahnaz, so we'll get there. So it's a great pleasure of mine, there we go, to introduce Pamela Morgan. She's from the Zonta Club of Essex County, District 3 in the USA, which is New Jersey. And for those of you who haven't been to the USA, it is on the East Coast. It's kind of sandwiched between Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., and New York City in a broad sense. So Pamela is the Zonta International representative at the United Nations. She is also the co-chair of the NGO CSW 67 Forum, serves as chair of Zonta International United States Committee, leading teams of representatives in New York, Geneva, Vienna, Paris, and Bangkok. In her capacity as Zonta International representative to the UN, she also serves on the executive committees of NGO CSW New York and the NGO Committee on Migration. Pamela is also the executive director of Women in Media, Newark. Newark is a city in her home state of New Jersey. It's a not-for-profit organization which she founded that advocates for and educates the community about issues affecting women globally using film, video, and new media as its platform. Their flagship event is their annual Women's History Month Film Festival, where they screen an international array of independent film by and about women. A retired educator, Pamela worked for over 35 years in public education, with 20 of those years focused on the administration of instructional technology. She has served on numerous New Jersey State Department of Education instructional technology committees and was a contributor to 2 of the New Jersey State educational technology plans. Pamela gave testimony before a United States Senate subcommittee investigating funding for instructional technology and performed research on the effective implementation of community-based telecommunications networks. If you think of any questions while you're listening to Pamela, would you please put them in the chat and we'll monitor that and we'll ask the questions later. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce Pamela. So Pamela, away you go. Go ahead and fill us with your beautiful words.
Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you to the think tank for inviting me to participate in today's Zonta International Climate Change meeting, and also for the opportunity for me to conduct research on this topic, because in my work, my general work at the UN, climate change is not the total focus. I'm focused more on the women's movement and migration. So I've learned an awful lot, and I hope to be able to share a lot with you quite quickly. I'm going to share my screen. Excuse me, and go directly into. Are you able to see the presentation?
Yes, looks great.
Thank you. The member states of the United Nations take the issue of climate change quite seriously in their quest to achieve the 2030 agenda. There are 2 SDGs that talk specifically about climate change, SDG 13 and SDG 15. So although we have these 2 SDGs that are very specific, if we look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, we see that there is actually a relationship to all of them to climate change. If you're looking at poverty, we know how changing climate can affect personal financial resources. If we look at hunger, we know that climate can change the food sources that are available. So we know that climate change is one of the most impactful issues looking at achieving the 2030 agenda. In 2016, the UN System Chief Executives Board for Coordination, the CEB, adopted the common core principles for a UN system-wide approach to climate change. And this means that the entire organization was mandated to focus on climate. So for many of us, we think that only one area of the UN is climate focused, but that's far from being accurate. The UN has taken a series of steps to mitigate climate change, including raising awareness. So for people who may not understand the science of climate change, they've enacted some climate action theme days. So February 10th is World Pulses Day, March 30th, Zero Waste Day. And they've done this in the effort to make the civil society, particularly, aware that this is something that affects all of us. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, signed into action in 1992, is the lead entity focused on climate change, with an ultimate aim of preventing dangerous human interference with the climate system. It's an important agreement, and there are other agreements that are based on the FCCC. What you will most often see, however, in the news is information coming from UNFCCC, because that is able to focus people on one entity. However, we know that there are international agreements that are built on the UN Framework Convention. So the Kyoto Protocol, which was signed into existence in 1997, and the Kyoto Protocol operationalizes the UN Framework's Convention on Climate Change by committing industrialized countries and economies in transition to limit and reduce greenhouse gases emissions in accordance with agreed individual targets. We have the Doha Amendment to the Kyoto Protocol from 2012, and then we have the Paris Agreement from 2015 at COP21, and COP is the Conference of Parties, and that Paris Agreement was perhaps the most ambitious of all of the treaties, and it's a legally binding international treaty on climate change. It was adopted by 196 parties, which is pretty major, at the UN Climate Change Conference, referred to as the Conference of Parties in Paris, on December 12, 2015, and it entered into force on the 4th of November, 2016. It works on a 5-year cycle of increasingly ambitious climate change carried out by individual countries. So just for your information, COP27 in Egypt, which was held this year, the end of November 2022, it looked at loss and damage. And then upcoming in November of 2023, it's going to, COP28 will be held in Dubai. And what was interesting about COP27, looking at loss and damage, is that it was probably the first time that there was such an emphasis on the financial aspects of climate change, and looking for people to take responsibility when looking at loss and damage. Now we're going to take a look at some UN agencies and determine how they integrate climate change into their work. So first, it's the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. And it was set up by the World Meteorological Organization, the WMO, and the United Nations Environment Program to provide governments an objective source of scientific information. In 2013, the IPCC provided more clarity about the role of human activities in climate change when it released its 5th assessment report, which is really important for us to know. And that is when it gave its categorical conclusion that climate change is real and human activities are the main cause. So that's why IPCC is important, because it is the scientific body that is governing what is happening with climate change. So then we have the WMO, the World Meteorological Organization, and it's dedicated to international cooperation, and it studies the climate as well. Let's move on to, UNDP. The United Nations Environmental Program is the leading global environment authority that sets the global environmental agenda. It promotes the coherent implementation of the environmental dimensions of sustainable development within the UN system. We look at UNDP, and the UNDP supports countries' efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, the global goals, including by working with countries to turn their climate goals into action. Now we're going to take a look at United Nations regional commissions. And I know I'm going quickly, but there's so much information. And I think that this information can inform the work of this body. Excuse me. You have United Nations regional commissions. You have the Economic Commission for Africa. And its mission is to deliver ideas and actions for an empowered and transformed continent, informed by the 2030 Agenda and Agenda 2063. And that is relatively new, because we've been focused on 2030, and now they're projecting forward to 2063. Its African Climate Policy Center works toward the goal of contributing to poverty reduction through successful mitigation and adaptation to climate change in Africa, and to improve the capacity of African countries to participate effectively in multilateral climate negotiations. We have the Economic Commission for Europe, the ECE, and its major aim is to promote pan-European economic integration, as well as cooperation, sustainable development, and economic prosperity. It's a driving force in combating climate change in the region. We have the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, and its mission in the field of climate change is to jointly contribute with its partners to knowledge generation and public policy design that promotes adaptation that is inclusive and sustainable, integrating the transition to environmentally sustainable and low greenhouse gas economies. We have the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, ESCAP, and it serves as a regional hub to promote cooperation among countries to achieve inclusive and sustainable development. ESCAP is committed to supporting its 53 member states in realizing how their climate change and resilient ambitions, particularly the least developed countries and small island developing states, through capacity building, policy dialogues, and the sharing of experiences and information. And then lastly, we have the Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia. And they work with partners to tackle climate change and issues in the region. So those are regional bodies that the United Nations has in place to tackle climate change on the ground. Now, the UN also understands that a lot of our strength is through the youth. So they have specific programs aimed at youth that can help to tackle tackle climate change, and I'll go through these quickly. The Climate Change Challenge Badge is a resource from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. It is part of a series designed to help raise awareness, educate, and motivate youth to become active agents of change in their communities. The Climate Change Education from UNESCO Associated Schools for Climate is, excuse me, a part of the Global Action Program on Education for Sustainable Development, and it has piloted a whole institution approach with a focus on climate change. Climate is Changing, the activity book, is a part of a series of books by the UN Food and Agriculture Committee to familiarize youth with their work and how they can take action to become the zero hunger generation. And then the Mission 1.5 Degrees mobile game is universally created mobile game. And by universally, I mean it's available in all UN languages. And it helps young people learn about the climate crisis, and it's actually fun. And it helps older people learn about the climate crisis also. And then there's the SDG Book Club with Goal 13 Climate Action being one of the selections. So now we're going to take a look at how climate change is used across other parts of the UN system. We've already heard how the Food and Agriculture Organization provides resources for youth. And they know that climate change threatens the ability to ensure global food security, while greenhouse gas emissions from human activity and livestock are a significant driver of climate change. Their work on climate change supports countries to mitigate and adapt climate change efforts as part of the work on the 2030 agenda with the SDGs. The Greening of the Blue is an annual report that details the UN system's environmental footprint and the efforts to reduce it. The high-level expert group on net zero emissions commitments of non-state entities. The Secretary General established this expert group in March 2022 to develop stronger and cleaner standards for net zero emissions pledges by non-state entities, meaning businesses, investors, cities, and regions, to speed up their implementation. The International Civil Aviation Organization they work to minimize adverse effects of international civil aviation on the global climate. The Fund for Agricultural Development works to promote agricultural growth that is environmentally sustainable and integrated into ecosystems, and to help farmers, fishermen, etc., become more resilient in the impact of climate change. And then we look at the International Labor Organization. Again, they recognize that our future depends on a just transition to a carbon and resource efficient economy and a healthy planet, and is working to address climate change and achieve that just transition to work, because work is their focus, including on green jobs and the Climate Action for Jobs initiatives. The International Monetary Fund seeks to address challenges of climate change for which fiscal and macroeconomic policies are a component of policy response, publishing research on economic implications of climate change. So you can see just by this list that this is an entire UN focus. It's an entire organization looking at it. We can look at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, where they are promoting a human rights-based approach to climate change, UN Habitat, that works with international climate bodies and global city networks to influence climate policy and action, promoting the role of cities and human settlements in mitigation and adaptation. DESA, the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, that is the UN development pillar and it's the home of the Sustainable Development Goals, including Goal 13. And they help countries make informed decisions through their publications, databases, and support to deliberations at the United Nations on climate change and other bodies. We have UNESCO, which is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, and how they have incorporated climate change into their curriculum. The UN Compact, the UN Global Compact, which is a voluntary based on CEO commitments to implement universal sustainability principles and support UN goals. We have the High Commissioner on Refugees, the Refugee Agency, and they provide critical emergency assistance during time of displacement, and they're taking action on climate change displacement. UNICEF, critically important, and Zonta International is one of UNICEF's oldest. In fact, we are the oldest civil society partner that UNICEF has. And they understand that climate change is a direct threat to a child's ability to survive, grow, and thrive. And they work with their partners at the global and local levels to address climate change and to mitigate its impact, to protect the world's children and fulfill their rights. UNITAR is the UN Institute for Training and Research, and they provide learning solutions to individuals, organizations, and institutions to enhance global decision-making and support country-level action for shaping a better future. And they offer numerous climate change learning resources. And as an aside, the governor of Zonta District 1 just finished a course with UNITAR, and she found it to be very, very helpful. It's free, it's open to the public. Anyone can take a course with UNITAR. So if you're so interested, please, you can go online, do a Google search for UNITAR. The UN Climate Security Mechanism, and they seek to help the UN system address climate-related security risks more systematically. Then we have the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, and their activities relating to SDG 13 on climate action support efforts to promote sustainability, adapt and build resilience against the climate emergency as part of their work with governments, and to build green and blue economies. Then we look at the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. And again, their work is to focus on the coordination of disaster reduction. The UN Population Fund, UNFPA, which Zonta partners with very often. It's the United Nations Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency, and they're working with governments and other partners to support adaptation responses to climate change and to put women and girls at the center of these efforts. So at this time, if we have questions, I would like to address them.
Thank you so much, Pamela. That was so enriching. So many resources. I have written down questions. I'm going to be Googling more later today.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. I was afraid it was too long, I have to be honest, but it was so much that I thought people needed to know that I took a chance. So thank you for being graceful and patient with me.
Oh, it was worth it. We loved every minute of it because I don't remember a time where we were able to get a picture of what the United Nations is doing, the whole picture. So that really broke everything down, showed us where, where, if we have interest in certain areas, where can we go? who, which agency of the UN can we look for more information. So it was incredibly helpful to all of us, I'm sure. Thank you again. Just loved listening to you. I'm going to throw it over to Bobby. She's going to give you the questions that came up in the chat. So thank you both.
Hi, Pam. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I did have a couple questions in the chat. First of all, you mentioned that the Paris Agreement is legally binding on the signatories. And I wonder, how could that possibly be enforced? Or how does the UN intend to enforce that?
I think that's the $64,000 question, because we know even with the CSW, which is, I think that with any legally binding document, CEDAW is legally binding. And how do the governments adhere to it? I think we have national reviews that come up where the countries are mandated to give a review of their status. But we know that people can be tricky, and they can paint things in a way that they want them painted. So I think my honest opinion is that it's up to advocacy of civil society to hold various governments to their commitments. I don't think that the United Nations is able to fully monitor and ensure that there's going to be adherence. If there's something glaring, there are punitive measures that are taken. But I really believe, just as with CSW, that advocacy, on the ground advocacy, is a healthy way to proceed.
Oh, well, there's a job for us. Okay, and there's a couple other questions that relate to your speaking about the youth programs. How can we obtain the UN resources for youth? And I'm going to give you the second question as well. How can we engage our Z clubs and Golden Zs with the UN's youth-focused programs?
All of the resources are available online. So you can Google them and find them. And I think that engaging the Z clubs and Golden Z clubs I don't think it's difficult at all. I think that we can either develop a curriculum that we can push out, or we can provide a series of resources to the Z clubs and Golden Z clubs. But I think that that's one of the easier things we can do.
And then it would be wonderful to have them as spokespeople at the UN as well, or participating in some of these.
I agree. If you remember from this year's CSW, a lot of attention was given to the young people. There were a number of young people who were who the Secretary General encouraged to participate. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Well, there's a focus for all of us in all our countries. We had a lot of comments about how informative your program was, but I have, let's see, one more question I wanted to fit in before we're done. Do you think the climate convention and biodiversity conventions will ever merge?
What an interesting question. And it seems as though they should merge, but because, and I'm trying to say this very delicately, because the United Nations is an institution made up of humans, and human beings sometimes like having their positions of power in different places. I don't know if people would want to relinquish the control that they have on a certain area.
Human nature. Yeah.
It's human nature, yeah.
And one more question that's really too big for this, for you to fit in a minute, but maybe you can summarize. Can you describe your Zonta role with the UN and what it involves?
My Zonta role with the UN is a voluntary role that takes probably 50 hours a week. And it involves, it's vast. It involves meetings with various committees, meetings with member states, meetings with outside organizations. For instance, on Thursday, I went to a meeting with the Minister of Economics from Germany, and it was a think tank type of meeting where she wanted to know where we need to go with sustainable development. And she was just asking people, a round table, what makes you happy when looking at it, rather than picking it apart. I thought that was pretty brilliant for her to take that approach. But a lot of meetings, a lot of strategy, working with NGO CSW intensely. I was the co-chair of the CSW 67 NGO CSW Forum, and I've just been nominated to become the co-chair of NGO CSW for the upcoming biennium. So a lot of work with that, working with the other teams. So I work with Bangkok, Paris, Vienna, Geneva, Africa. And with Africa, we're just in the process of developing a working plan. This is the first year that we've had Africa as part of our team. And I don't know anyone in the Africa UN system. So I'm learning and they're learning as well. So we do that. The Geneva team is fantastic. The Vienna team is dynamic. Ingeborg is leading it, and they're just going into CCPCJ, the Crime Commission. And that work is interesting. So we all try to attend meetings from the other groups. Strategy, planning, keeping track of our strategic plan. Where are we on the strategic plan? I could go on for a very long time.
Yes, I'm sure. Thank you so much. You really have contributed so much to our understanding, and I'm sure we have more questions that we will think of and be sending your way. But in the interest of time, it is time
Bobby,
to...
I enjoy interacting and answering questions because it makes me think, and it makes me, it keeps me on my toes. So please send your questions. Please share my email address. I would love to interact.
Wonderful, wonderful. We really appreciate all your insights. It's time for me to now turn this over to Angela Broekman, who is going to lead us in our breakout sessions. Angela.
Thank you, Bobby. The presentations today have been awesome. And so now we will have some time to reflect on what we've heard from today's speakers. But I ask you, what resonated with you? How do you feel about the situation in Sri Lanka? What can we do to support Pam at the UN? So we're now going to break out into some feedback or in small groups, and everyone will have the opportunity to reflect on those two topics. And once we complete working in the group, we will come back together and we will share the outcomes from our group. So Carol, are you ready to divide us into our groups, please?
Just a note to say thank you to my group because we were chatting and we just, had a lot to say.
Just to get, I think everyone's coming back in. That's great. I'll hand back to Angela.
Yes. I'm hoping that everyone had a very robust discussion in their groups. I know that in our group, we were excited to find and identify all the training available through the UN, and the UNITAR training was addressed. And so I know some folks are going to be looking at that and seeing if any of that may also be a tool that they can bring in at the local level, like through their waste management boards, to see what we can do from there. And in Sri Lanka, you know, the understanding of what migration and disaster and what that does, and to continue to address how can we bring women to the table so that the women's needs are first recognized and then there's action taken in support of those. So those were the main highlights from the group I was in. Bobby, what about your group?
You're on mute, Bobby.
Yes, right. My goodness, we had a lot to say. We started by talking about the awareness of youth in our countries or in our Golden Zs and Z clubs as of climate change as a gender issue. And I think it's basically not there yet. I think this is an opportunity for us. Marie Voigt was saying that in Germany, the youth are very aware, but really hadn't thought about this as a gender issue. They're very aware of climate change being the issue. In Canada, I guess there are a number of Golden Z clubs, but this may not have been a focus yet. In Nigeria, let's see, Anas was saying that there are Golden Z clubs and so forth, but we need to introduce it to them, and we need to advocate that this is a women's issue so that they see it that way, because it definitely is on people's minds, but in all our countries, but it's not necessarily seen as a gender issue. And then we also talked about, let's see, Judith from Canada talked about the need to educate our local emergency responses and coordinating it better. And she talked about what happened in British Columbia during a climate emergency. I can't remember which kind.
It was extreme heat, very hot, a heat cone or something. It's like putting a lid on a pot. Oh yeah,
right.
Years ago, yeah.
But she pointed out a very interesting fact that though there were 619 deaths, this data is not disaggregated for us to know how many are women. You know, there's a focus on other things like age and like whether the person was confined in their home or not, but no focus on gender. So this is where we can make an impact, is trying to change that, get some disaggregated data in all of our countries. And then Anas from Nigeria was saying that in the flooding situation, 60% of the victims were women and 40% men. So it is clearly a women's issue, and that there is a framework for taking action, but there is very little implementation of it. And so that's where Zonta can take some action and draw attention to the need for looking at gender participation, or a gender focus, I guess, on the disaster. And also Judith mentioned that the climate disasters particularly affect the Indigenous women in Canada, who depend on the salmon for their food security. And when climate disasters impact that, there is increased food security among everyone in the country, but particularly the women. So that's where we went with our discussion, sort of covered a lot of topics. I'm not sure who is next.
Angela, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Pia.
Okay, yes, we also had a lot of discussions and talking. Everybody had so much ideas, and we learned a lot from Shana and from Pamela Morgan. We're very proud of having you there, doing so much good work for all women. And our talking was a lot like the others, so that we need to be at the table, like the story from Shahnaz on Sri Lanka. We need to have women in decision positions and work for that. And we also had Marie from the Philippines that had a lot of ideas about that we should be on social media a lot. We can do a lot being there, and I very much agree that we should be. It's a way to work faster, I think, to reach our goals much faster and reach younger generations. Yeah, that's about it. Short words.
Thank you.
Good energy.
And,
yeah.
And Julie, your group?
Thank you, Angela. Oh, we had a robust conversation in our group. It was wonderful. It started out with a question about the slide in Shahnaz's presentation, and you may remember it. It had numerous pictures. One was more of a cartoon with a man with his feet over a woman using her as an ottoman, and then there was another photo in it that had women protesting and saying, "Have you ever been abused for breaking a plate?" was one of the signs. So that really got us going. And it evolved into the human rights issue, the issue of women and migration. And that was the most robust part of our talk. Pamela felt that we should take into consideration as Zontians how we can help women in migrating as a result of climate disasters. One idea she presented was to consider the human rights aspect and human trafficking, and how can we as Zontians help? Can we position ourselves in countries that being at borders or at migration centers where we can provide information or observe what's going on and report back, collect data or other things, represent what we do so that we can help them out. Amita talked about how many more different populations are moving into Kenya as a result. And we talked about, Karen mentioned how we need to have more information for women and children who are facing these horrible climate disasters and have to leave their homes. And because there's not enough counsel to show them the way safely without being picked up for human trafficking. And we all felt that was a horrible scenario for any woman to end up from going from their community, having to leave it as a result of climate disaster and then end up in human trafficking. We felt that was abhorrent. Pamela talked about the Zonta Club of Bangladesh. They've been going into camps. So this is a great thing to think about. Providing feminine hygiene products. So how can we all do that as Zontians? What can we do to help in any disaster area? Because, and in Shahnaz's presentation, she did talk about how to get women at the table to help develop the camps, to help build the camps. And we felt that was a really important aspect, because whether it's a camp or an evacuation shelter anywhere in the world, nobody is immune to increased violence against women, sexual assault, etc., women and children, actually. So it's been going on for too many years. And we feel like more has to be done. So thank you. It was a great talk.
Thank you, Julie. Karen, did you have any highlights from your group?
I was in the same group as Julie, so.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Thank you.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I didn't know who was in the group. And then Delruba, were you in one of the other groups already, or did you have a separate group?
Carol, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I lost my mute. Yes, I think we've covered everybody's comments now, which is great. So I'll just sort of wrap up from where we are. Our other business that we've got, I think we run out of time for the chat line, but I just wanted to really bring your attention to on the Zonta Says Now International webpage. There's some space for a virtual art exhibition. And Julie is working with Pamela Morgan to develop some guidelines for this. Anyway, last month our meeting finished abruptly, so I wasn't able to share with you these photos from the District 25 Area 1 climate-related art competition for art teachers. And Eric Olavia shared these winning entries with us in the working group, and they were so great and inspiring, I had to share them with you all. Anyway, I will be hearing more from Pamela and Julie about this project, the virtual art exhibition, in coming months. Just want to remind you, if you've got a birthday coming up or a special anniversary, it's your opportunity to lead by example and donate to the Zonta Endowment Fund, which is our environmentally friendly gift option for the sustainability of Zonta. And if you're writing your will, keep a copy of the legacy leaflet with your will documents, so as it's ready on hand when you review your will the next time. So it gives you the options to leave some money to Zonta. Our next meeting will be on Sunday, the 18th of June, from 6 p.m. UTC. Remember that we alternate the time every month by 6 hours. So please put this date in your calendars now. And next month, we'll be hearing from Judith from Canada and Eric from India. So don't miss it. The video from today's meeting will be uploaded to the Intercontinental think tank page on the District 23 Zonta Says Now website in the next couple of days. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. So finally, I want to thank today's speakers enormously.
Yes,
I hope
yeah, it was great.
As much as, and enjoy
Thank you so much.
Discussion afterwards. That's the joy of this think tank, is meeting and talking to Zontans from around the world. And that's the bit we like, that touches, moves and inspires us all. Anyway, so I hope it inspires you all to take action. And remember that through our gender equal climate action, we are building a better world for women and girls. So until next month, keep breathing, keep smiling, and have fun. Okay, bye for now.
Bye.
Bye
Bye.
for now.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, everyone.